Hey, everybody, it's Thursday, and you know what that means? The latest episode of Bold Leaders in Learning. I'm Brandon Busteed, president of University Partners and global head of Learn Work at Kaplan. And I'm excited to have Ron Lieber with us today. Many of you probably know his name. He's a well-known New York Times columnist and has written his latest book, which has become a New York Times bestseller, The Price You Pay for College. There, it is just packed with all kinds of fascinating information for people who are going through the college decision-making process. And so, Ron, we're definitely going to be diving into a lot of really gritty topics that you've covered in this expansive book. But maybe before we do that, just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background, and then from there, just give us the basic premise of why this book and what it's really trying to address.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. It's great to reconnect. As some of you in the audience may know, Brandon was featured in the book, and the work that he used to do at Gallup, formed some of the core, kind of facts and figures that I drew on and drew inspiration from when I went out lapping the country, talking to college and university presidents and enrollment managers, sometimes to their chagrin. But quite often they cited the Gallup research unprompted, which just goes to show the impact that it has had. So my story is this. I'm a Chicagoan, born and bred, have lived in Brooklyn since 1994, have been at the New York Times as the personal finance columnist since 2008. I started writing about personal finance in 2002 when I went to the Wall Street Journal to help launch their personal journal section. I consider my beat to be beating the system. I define personal finance very broadly. My higher ed story is that I applied early decision to Amherst College in 1988, got in and was able to get to and through, thanks in part to the incredibly kind treatment from Joe Paul Case, or St. Joe, as he is known in our household. He was the director of financial aid at Amherst College back then, and is, something of a legend in the industry. His side hustle was that he was an ordained minister. And so, you can imagine the sort of pastoral care he brought to the task of helping, people like me whose parents did not have enough money to pay full freight, make it work. So to the extent that I have biases in these areas, it's towards schools that are incredibly generous because of the gratitude, I have, and also towards, schools that are smaller because I had such a positive experience with a small one. And so I wrote The Price You Pay for College because my inbox was increasingly filling up year after year at the New York Times with notes from parents who had gone through the system with their first and only kid, thought that there was going to be financial aid, need-based financial aid for them at the end, were shocked when there wasn't, or there wasn't very much, or they were offered merit aid. They didn't know what merit aid was. Nobody had explained it to them. And they were coming to me in April thinking that I could somehow solve their problem in a space of a few weeks, and I couldn't. And then there was a different set of people who couldn't believe that in the era of big data, that there was no data that could explain to them why Duke was $200,000 better than Chapel Hill. And I thought, wow, this is a new question in the world of personal finance, and we don't get those questions very often, right? Because what these people were asking was not how to save for college, classic personal finance topic, and it wasn't how to pay, kind of a new classic in the world of personal finance, writing about debt and student loans. They were asking what to pay. They were asking a value question, and I didn't know how to answer them. And it was going to take a book to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, so it's funny you've already thrown the UNC Chapel Hill Duke gauntlet down. I mean, some people know I'm a Duke grad. Ron has clearly gone right at that. So I'll tell you my story. Last year, not this year, but last year when trick-or-treating, I had a Duke sweatshirt on. And I saw a family, a mom and two of her kind of high school age kids with her. And the one had a Duke shirt on. And I was like, oh, hey, go Duke. And led into a quick conversation and said, yeah, we're looking at different colleges. And I said, so are you looking at Duke? And the mom quickly interrupted and said, no, we're not. She said, we're looking at Chapel Hill. She said, because it's considerably cheaper and the earnings potential for grad. She had done all the math, all that, right? Like And so she had already answered this question of like, why pay that difference? So I tried my best to give her my Duke pitch. It didn't go anywhere. So, but Ron, it's a really important question, right? I think about it through the lens too of, there's huge differences in the reported price tag of universities. We know behind the scenes, there's this complex formula of discounting that universities go through, and some of it's pitched as merit aid and need aid, and that gets convoluted in various ways, which you talk about in the book. But even stepping outside the US, one of the things I've been grappling with lately is the top ranked universities in the US compared to the other top ranked universities around the world. Our top ranked universities are somewhere between 3 and 4 times more expensive. So you go, well, wait a minute, what's the US difference between, say, the top ranked universities in the UK or Australia or wherever else around the world might be? So there's a lot to unpack here. I want to go to the subtitle of the book, right? Because you talk about it as an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decision your family will ever make. 30 years ago, we would have never talked about college as the biggest financial decision your family will ever make. We are now. Let's just start there. Why is that the case?
Well, I mean, if you're taking an expansive view of big, you're thinking about it this way, right? You're a parent. Chances are you live in chances are if you are a parent, you have 2 kids, because that's the most common scenario. Some people, there are people who have more, there are people who have fewer, but 2 kids is sort of the average, right? And if you're in the sort of upper middle class milieu that I deal with as a reporter for the New York Times and in the world of nonfiction book publication, you are probably at least considering the possibility of sending your kids to a private college or university. And if you earn an upper middle class income, there's a decent chance you won't qualify for much need-based aid. And so if those schools are on the table, in today's dollars, you're looking at the possibility of $600,000. Chances are you live in a part of the world where your house costs less than that. And even if it costs more, right? You're buying it with borrowed money and you get all that money back and then some at some point later on, which is usually how this works. With college, it's different. More than that, these are our precious children, right? Our flesh and blood, or the ones that we took in from the adoption agency. All we want is to launch them into the stratosphere. And this decision feels incredibly high stakes, and that there are possibilities for like abject failure and, sort of shooting the lights out, into stardom. And it's important, right? So that combination of, money and feelings just makes this thing, bubble up to the point where it feels like nothing else could or would be more important, at least from a personal finance perspective, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So look, I'll sprinkle in a couple of the macro data points, and then we'll get back to this, kind of more of the micro decision making that happens at the family unit level around all this. Higher ed, the sticker price of higher ed tuition has gone up well over 400% since 1980, right? Which is just astronomical. It's more than 2x increases in healthcare costs, right? I mean, anything you compare it to, it's in its own stratosphere. At the same time, right, median wages of bachelor degree holders in the US have essentially been flat over that same time frame. So the cost has gone up astronomically. That return on investment, if you're thinking about it in the way you do as a personal finance advisor, right, the return is very different. And then, of course, we know there has been the acceleration of student loan debt that has gone hand in hand with that. We've hit 1.6 trillion, depending on, the exact count of student loan debt, most of which has been added in roughly the last decade or so, right? So, the acceleration of this is just really astounding, and it's leaving a lot of people out. Now you throw a pandemic on top of this, a national recession, and it just, we're in this crazy place right now. But let's go back to the decision, because you talk about all kinds of factors in the book, things that do matter for the student's experience and long-term success, things that don't matter or don't matter as much. If we try and dissect all the things that we think of when we say the word college, right? All the different pieces, the social life, the academics, this, that, the buildings, the grounds, right? The big question is, do we really know what matters most. And this goes to the heart of some of the Gallup Purdue Index research and things like that. But why don't you take us through a couple examples of the things that really do matter when you're evaluating a college, the value of it, and some of the things that maybe don't as much in terms of what we have perceptions of, but aren't really a big factor?
The answer to your question is no, we don't have the faintest idea. And part of what I was trying to do here is get a bead on what people really thought that they were shopping for. And in many instances, most in fact, they just hadn't stopped to really define it for themselves. And so I just kept asking and asking and asking and asking for years and years. And ultimately, the answers kind of boil down to three things, right? People are going to college to have their minds grown and their minds blown, right? They're going for the education. They're going to have their brain taken apart and reassembled by expert practitioners into a bigger, better version of what it once was. So that's number one. You go to college for the learning, for the intellectual roller coaster. Number two, you go to college for the kinship, right? You go to find your people, the friends, as one person put it to me, who you never could have imagined existing elsewhere in the world, right? The people who you never would have found in your homogeneous hometown. And then also, kinship is not just about your peers, it's about the adults who can affect and influence you. It's the mentors who will grab you by the scruff of your neck and drag you into a better version of yourself. So that's number two. Number three is the credential. Right. And that could be a credential that grants you entry into a certain industry, form of employment, or it could be the kind of credential from a more elite selective institution that opens all sorts of doors to you into rooms that you or your family never, ever would have had access to otherwise. So that's what it boiled down to. And now I pass no judgment on anyone who thinks that college really should only be about one of those things. And I pass no judgment on any family that thinks the credential is like 90% of the exercise, right? The only people I pass judgment on are the people who are sort of wandering around aimlessly without stopping to ask what it is that they're thinking about spending $300,000 for, because that's really freaking expensive, right? Yeah. And we need to be better educated consumers in order to make the most kind of emotionally intelligent decisions.
Yeah. So one of the things you talk about is, I think some people understand this, but I don't know how prevalent it is, right? Like, people pay different prices for the same institution, right? This is like universities are like an airplane. Everybody's on the same plane, right? And they're all paying a different price depending on when they bought the ticket, depending on if they're in first class, depending on if they, added the upgraded meal plan or whatever it is, right? So just take us a little bit through, some of the nuances here of, maybe your top 2 or 3 tips that parents need to understand about this process. Because one of the things that I took away from it, and I've shared in some of my parenting friend circles, is that you can negotiate with colleges. Well, in some more than others. And so just give us some of your top, you mentioned, you look at your role as kind of how to beat the system. Give me your top tips for beating the college system here as a parent.
It's much easier, if we're thinking about, right, how to get a price that's different from the list price. It's much easier to get some clarity and transparency around the old-fashioned need-based aid system, the one that I went through, because now all these schools are required to have something known as the net price calculator. You dump your data in, it spits out an estimate of what you might pay if you were to get in, and that's reasonably straightforward. They aren't always perfectly accurate, but they're not bad, right?
Yep.
So there it's easy enough to kind of get a guess, but on this newfangled merit aid system that's kind of hived itself off, there is often not very much predictability about what percentage of the class gets any kind of an offer and how big that offer is. And moreover, just to be crystal clear about it, merit aid has nothing to do with how much money you make and how much money you have, and everything to do with who your kids are and what they've done, right? And so there are all sorts of rich families whose kids are getting merit aid, which is, sort of boggles the mind in this age of, increasing conversations around equity, because merit aid is in fact not about equity, at least directly, right? And so how do you get a bead on what your kid might be offered? It isn't easy. Most schools make it deliberately hard and refuse to provide data or predictability around who might get merit and under what circumstances. And so you have to try and tease it out through something that most colleges produce called the common data set, which is the data they provide to the US News of the world. And you've got to look it up on Google and find, be like a real geek, like find line 8, section H2A. And there's a line of H2A where you figure out like what percentage of the people who didn't qualify for any need-based aid still got a discount from this college, and what was the average amount. And then you go back 2 pages and you see, what was the SAT score for the top 10% of the class? And then you can kind of begin to figure it out. But the transparency is so lacking that there are now a large handful of for-profit startups that are in the game to help parents get the predictability that the schools flat out refuse to provide.
Yeah. Well, one of my guests that I had 3 or 4 weeks ago was Melissa Korn, who obviously, Wall Street Journal reporter who, wrote the book about the, varsity blues college admissions scandal. That's a whole other angle for predictability, right? Of like ensuring that, you like there's the side door, there's the back door, right? You're still talking about everything in your book is still talking about the front door. Sometimes it's not very clear. It's hidden in a bunch of ivy. You got to brush it off, right? But so to your point, you can do some digging, right? The sophisticated consumer can get at some of this stuff, but no one's making it easy, right? And so, as you think about a couple things that are happening, take us back to, some of the basic tips you would give as you tour a college, or the kind of data that you can get a hold of that would give somebody, so put aside price for a second, put aside tuition, put aside the merit aid piece, right? Like, how do I sniff out a college that's going to really be a great development experience for my son or daughter? What do you ask on the tour? What kinds of metrics do you want to kind of pick out on the website? And I know, you mentioned that you're going to be taking your oldest on an early college tour visit soon. So, I know you're thinking about this as dad, not just writer, but give us your best tips for what you look for to guarantee there's a great experience.
Yeah, I mean, I want to know what a school stands for and how it replies to, harder than average questions. I mean, I'm a journalist by trade, right? So I'm in the business of asking inconvenient and uncomfortable questions. I'm not going to be an easy traveling companion for my big kid, when it's time to go do this. But I want to know about things like what percentage of her time in her first 2 years will she spend in classes with over 50 people? What percentage of her time, I don't want ratios, right? What percentage of her time will she spend in classes in her first 2 years with professors who are not professors, right? Or who are people, professors who are adjuncts or graduate students, right? I want to know what is the average waiting period to see a mental health counselor if my kid needs help? And is she limited to a certain number of sessions per semester? How seriously is the school taking this? I want to walk into the Career Counseling Center and go to the first person I see and say, I'm a prospective parent, and I'd like a copy of your first destination survey. I'd like to know, where your kids end up 12 months from now. And, my daughter's thinking about being a religion major, right? Can you show me the aggregate data on your 12 religion majors and what happens to them 12 months later and whether they're gainfully employed and what their average earnings are?
Yeah.
And if your college starts waving their hands and talking about FERPA or like saying that the information is proprietary, I don't know, that's a school that you want to go to.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, so you are asking good, tough questions. Those are questions that ought to be asked. I've got kind of a version that's kind of similar to yours from the lens of the research that I've been involved in. But it's the same story, right? If the reaction is, I don't know, that's not a great answer. If the reaction is, I can't tell you, that's not a great answer. And what I usually see most universities kind of failing on is that, like, for example, take an internship experience. We know through the lens of the Gallup Purdue Index research that students who had an internship during college where they were able to apply what they were learning in the classroom. There was a synergy between that work experience and their academic work, right? Doubles their odds of being engaged in life later, right? It's a very powerful relationship. So you say, that's a really important one that I want to make sure my kid has. Every university I've ever met with will say, oh, we offer internships. But then you go just a layer deeper and you say, what percentage of students have an internship, right? What percentage have that internship at the end of freshman year, sophomore year, as opposed to it didn't happen until, first semester, senior year, or whatever it is, right?
Right.
And then, to actually get into the question, how many of your academic programs require an internship that's connected academically, either to a preparatory course or a reflection course? And that's where those questions, it just all crumbles. It just crumbles.
And do you guarantee an internship opportunity to everyone who wants one? And do you ban internship providers from your campus who refuse to pay their interns in order to make sure there is equity, and the people, from lower income backgrounds who can't afford to work for free aren't having those opportunities dangled in front of them in a way that doesn't feel fair, right? I mean, colleges have a lot of power, and if they ban internship recruiters from posting jobs on their handshakes, where people aren't going to be paid, everybody will start paying their interns.
Yeah. Or, what I've been, so that's a key point. I like that point a lot, Ron. The other angle that I've been having a lot of conversations with the universities about is they have financial aid for all kinds of things, right? 67% of universities today do not offer financial aid, for example, for unpaid or low paid internship opportunities. So for students who are on that need-based, financial support, to include that as part of it. By the way, you want to raise money, you want your major gift officers to have a successful sales call with an alumnus, right? Ask them to support a fund for unpaid and low-paid internships for needy students. They would fill that bucket very quickly, but not many of them are making that effort, right? And not many parents are thinking about, wow, part of college, this internship thing and connectivity to the education is a real game changer, right? Like they are thinking about quality of the professors, right? That's front and center. But a lot of the kind of work integrated learning things are not as prominent on their radar in terms of looking at the quality. Now, I know in your book too, you highlighted a number of campuses that are doing some really, really great stuff, right, on a number of these dimensions. Can you just share a couple examples of not just the names of the institutions, but like what it is that they're doing that really gave you, the confidence to write about them?
Yeah, so I everywhere I went in my first year of Lapping America, schools seemed to be blowing their career services office to smithereens and rebuilding them, or at least doing so kind of metaphorically. As the president of St. Olaf College put it to me, we used to keep that office like over there on the edge of campus, and it was the shabbiest building, and the people there were kind of trained a long time ago and hadn't really kind of sharpened their skills or updated their offerings in way too long, and that wasn't right? Or as Clayton Spencer, the president of Bates College, put it to me, she says, oh yeah, right, the better the school, the worse the career services. And she wasn't joking.
Yeah.
She knew that to be a fact. And when she got to Bates College, she did, exactly what I just described. She blew the thing to smithereens and started it over and renamed it as the Center for Purposeful Work. I'm the big fan of Professor Damon of the Stanford University emeritus professor of psychology, who's written a lot about how adolescence is the quest for purpose. And so, I mean, that was just incredibly appealing to me because, you call something a career office and like, nobody's thinking about their career arc when they're 19, but everybody wants to feel a sense of purpose.
Yep. Yeah, no, Bates is a great example. The purposeful work framing, I think, is brilliant because it really bridges this incredibly silly divide that higher ed has created for itself between what we think of as the classic liberal arts, right? An education that broadly prepares you for the world, right? The attributes of critical thinking and skilled communication versus this other end of things where they will, put things like vocational or career in this bucket that's, that's very narrow and not part of college, right? Because we do this. But Bates is a well-known liberal arts institution that's put a big emphasis on work and avocation and career, and but the term purposeful work, I think, really crystallized that, like, yeah, we are looking for a purposeful outcome related to an ROI, and ideally it ought to be something that aligns with that student's interests and strengths and value system, and where they feel like they can contribute to the world, even if it might be in a for-profit organization or whatever the example might be. So I do think there are, well, to your point, a lot of campuses that are really rethinking career services in general. They're doing more thoughtful linkages between career services and academic programming, right? Which I think is one of the big disconnects. It's like student services. There's a whole co-curricular value to student services, but we've also kind of tucked student affairs on the side in terms of the academic experience. So I'm encouraged by a lot of these things starting to mold together, including interdisciplinary trends, right? Like we could go off on a whole other conversation about how higher ed has been organized in these academic silos. The exciting opportunities are where they're breaking down the silos and doing multidisciplinary studies. So I'm curious, go back to some of the things that started to prompt you to write this book, the notes you were getting from parents. Since you've written it, what have you heard about the reactions to what's resonated most with readers, and what new things have they hit you with that's now going to help you write your next book?
The reaction that has surprised me the most is the anger. The anger. People can't believe that this is what it's come to, and that this is what they're going to have to kind of put themselves through. It just feels to them like a lot of work. And that it's not necessary that it be so complicated. And there was incredibly thoughtful review in the New York Times of my book, reviewed by an outsider, a Yale University a law school professor, who thought that I kind of deserved an A+ for the job that I set out to do. But when he stepped back, he said, where is the critique of the system that forces us to navigate in this way? And how can we possibly dismantle it, as opposed to just I mean, I encourage people to approach the system with a sense of entitlement, right? About better answers and more transparency, instead of approaching it as a supplicant. And I thought that was revolutionary enough. But, there are a lot of people, including people in the academy, who want to blow the whole thing up. And so, I've taken the same look, we need to beat the system before we can break it. But, even people in the academy who agree with that overall critique have no idea how to begin to take it apart. And, if you even begin as a vice president of enrollment management to have these conversations in public about how we might kind of collectively fix things, you've got the federal, Department of Justice antitrust department coming after you, and not just the Trump people, who hated everybody and everything in higher ed, right? You've got antitrust people under Democratic presidents coming after you. And so, it's not clear how we begin to change or fix this, but people are mad. People are mad.
Yeah, look, and that mad and that anger and that, confusion, disillusionment, there's a lot of words that are kind of in there. I mean, it's related to the Varsity Blues scandal, right? Because people are like, is this really what it's all about? Like, it's broken, it's it's all that kind of stuff. And we know from a lot of good data that public support and confidence in higher education has been dropping like a rock over the last 6-7 years. We know that degree-seeking enrollments in the US have been on a decline for 10 consecutive years now. Like, there's real hurt out there. And, one of the things I know you and I both agree on that we would love to see happen in this world is a true consumer reports of higher education, something that's actually built on the reviews and thoughtful ratings of students and alumni, because we don't have anything like that. We've got rankings out there galore, but virtually none of them have anything to do with the actual ratings of the students who experienced it. So we're at the end of our time, but I just wanted to end on that point, right? Do Do you think that opening that up would help, and how would it help? What's your thoughts there?
Well, I don't think Consumer Reports has been bad for the economy. I don't think it's been bad for business. I think the opposite is true, right? And so, for everybody who has spent decades, angry at Bob Morse, who, is the sort of impresario of the U.S. news operation, why don't you go and make something better? And the fact of the matter is that, from a consumer perspective, it's not at all clear that these institutions want to be measured in a more effective way. Because, then we might find out that some very, very fancy places don't give a hoot about their undergraduates.
Right. And that's one of the big points that you've made in the book, right? Is to look at, how much emphasis they put on, if you're going to get a bachelor's degree, how much emphasis do those institutions put on undergraduate teaching, not research, not, which has its own purpose, right? But not necessarily for the benefit of undergrads. So lots of amazing things to unpack in the book. Those of you who haven't read it, please read it. Even if you're not a college shopper, I think it's a really, really well done book. And Ron, thanks for joining us. I look forward to having follow-up conversations, seeing what you're writing next, and really a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great fun.